on the rig.
Did you have specific concerns before you went, Frank?
No, I had no specific concerns. Having come from the aerospace industry, there are fairly obvious risks involved in that type of business. And again, it is understanding what's happening. I felt somewhat naked in my understanding and felt that if I could speak to the people who are doing the hands-on thing, then they can tell me quite how it's happening, and then I would make up my mind after that as to whether I was for or against. But at that stage, I was of no real opinion.
It tends to be that when things like this happen, whatever kind of energy it may be, people, whether they're for or against the idea, they tend to not be keen if it's happening quite near their homes, and this is happening very near your home. So do you mind?
Mm-hmm. No, having been to the visit, we understand that it may reach down as far as us, but I have to say I've got no concerns about that. I had many misconceptions, and I think that's one of the problems with most of the protest groups, that there are many misconceptions and a lot of mistruths kicking around in the media, and particularly in the YouTube area. I understood that it would be an explosive type exercise underneath the ground, when in fact it turns out it is in fact a pressure type exercise. There is no explosion. The safety features, the guys who did the presentation explained it all to us, how there was a big hole, then it was lined by some flexible cement, some very magic kind of cement, an inner lining, and everything is capped off. And of course that's in their interest, because you don't want the gas leaking up and escaping into the atmosphere. They are looking to contain just about everything that comes up. Also, I think there's a conception that it'll be like the old American gushers with the oil, with it all going squish high in the sky. This stuff will be quite passive and will progressively make its own way to the surface, but it's not going to do anything exciting, anything explosive. And in the end, my opinion was, it's all going to be a bit boring, to be honest.
That's a very interesting opinion. Thank you, Frank. That's Frank McLaughlin, who lives just over a mile from one of those proposed wells. You also heard from Nick Garnett, who's with him in Lytham.
But some people think it's not boring. Some people think it's very dangerous. More than 200 miles away in West Sussex, two protesters glued their hands together today to prevent lorries entering the site. There's a bit of a fuss going on there. Vanessa lives 4 miles from the Borkham site. Is the founder of Frack Free Sussex. You're pretty exercised about all this, Vanessa. What's the problem?
What's the problem? I would say to Frank, without wishing to sound matronising, you're still naked in your understanding, sir. Please look at the uninvested sources. Quadrilla have proven themselves to be inept. They've triggered earth tremors. They received ministerial reprimand for continuing to frack the damaged well at Preesall Farm. They've got a 50% failure rate in Lancashire. They damaged two...
I'm just going to show up you a bit, Vanessa, because Quadrilla aren't here to answer for themselves, so I'd prefer that you focused on exactly what's wrong with fracking rather than just talking about this company and its ills.
So people in Pennsylvania would not tell you it's boring. I've spoken personally to people who are really suffering. There are 1,400 families more who've already spoken out about the neurological problems, the silicosis in their lungs, the Duke University studies. All our ministers are saying there's no evidence of harm. It's not true.
Where does the silicosis come from?
The silica sand that they use, and the frack field workers are getting silicosis in their lungs. They're delivering it here.
So you're delivering it there? I didn't think you'd actually started fracking here. There.
Well, we haven't started doing anything yet, but they've been bringing in lorries. I don't know.
Are you sure that they're delivering that then?
I'm not absolutely sure yet.
So you just said they were delivering it, but you don't know whether they are or not?
What would you actually like me to tell you? Do you want to just harangue me, or would you like me to tell you?
No, I'd like to tell you what you know rather than what you suspect, that's all.
Okay, so ask me a question and I'll answer it.
Okay, what actual damage do you believe that this will cause to your area?
I don't know what it will do. That's the point, because you cannot legislate for the vagaries of subterranean geology. It's such a human arrogance that they say they can regulate this safely. We had a visitor who's an oil and gas industry scientist of 50 years from Canada. She said, we have the best regulations in the world. They fracked her land. Her water is poisoned. She has to carry the water in. She's now suing the Canadian government. Okay, they've got the best regulations in the world. They don't work. This technology is an ecocidal technology. It's a extreme energy technique. It is not boring. Nobody said anything about geysers and gushers. I don't know where that comes from. It messes with the subterranean geology. It risks methane, it risks the carcinogens that they put in, the radioactive isotopes that they release, getting into the aquifers, and the flaring that they do, the methane flaring with this constant flame. I've spoken to people in Pennsylvania, they say it's been like on a runway next to a live jet engine. I spoke to a man at Grange Road in Lancashire. I went up and I visited all the sites too. And I went up to him and he'd had quadrilla drilling within sight of him, not fracking, drilling, contravening the length of their regulation. They flouted that. They went on. It was supposed to protect overwintering
Okay.
days.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you short, Vanessa, only because I want to hear from one other spokesman. But thank you for talking to us. I hope you feel that you've had a chance to make your case. Dr. James Verdon is a research fellow, School of Earth Sciences, University of Bristol. It certainly raises the passions, James.
It certainly does, and I think there's been a huge amount of hype on both sides.
Go on then. Give me a dispassionate view in a couple of minutes.
Well, this view that it's some sort of ecocidal disaster zone that Pennsylvania has been turned into something akin to Mordor is certainly far from the case. The air quality measurements in Pennsylvania show general improvement, actually, because coal mining has slowed down and burning of coal in power plants has slowed down because shale gas is being burnt instead, which has benefited the air.
Yeah.
There are kind of data sets of kind of thousands of water quality measurements across the state, which show very little difference in the water quality between shale gas areas and areas without development. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been a handful of incidences. The main issue is the wellbore integrity. That if you do a very bad job of cementing the wellbore, then there's a risk that methane gas can rise up into shallow aquifers. But in terms of the chemicals that are listed, there's been no kind of peer-reviewed literature that showed any
Yeah,
kind of fracking
Quadrilla
chemicals
chief executive apparently said anything put in the ground has to go through the Environment Agency and has to be approved by them. So.
Well, regardless of what the Environment Agency, just talking about the peer-reviewed literature in the US, there's not been evidence of kind of the various fracking chemicals that are listed in the water supplies. There have been a handful of incidents of methane contamination, and obviously the problem is that you only have to have a handful of incidences to create some very big media attention and some very scary looking documentaries that have a lot of people very worried, understandably. But when you think that there are kind of several million of these wells drilled in the States without problem, and also in the UK, we have a couple of thousand onshore oil and gas wells in the UK. Now, we have very strong regulation in the UK, and we don't see these onshore oil and gas wells leaking. 200 of these wells have been hydraulically fractured, or fracked, as the word is. Now, these aren't necessarily on the same scale. The idea for shale gas extraction, which obviously Bolcombe isn't, is kind of a larger scale operation than what we've seen already in the UK. But I think to a certain extent the oil industry is a victim of its own success, because we don't notice the oil industry that's onshore in the UK, which is why I think perhaps it's come as a surprise to a lot of people, and there's a lot of attention and a lot of shock.
James Verdon, thank you very much indeed for bringing us neatly to the conclusion of today's programme. Thanks also for your various contributions. The time is approaching 7 o'clock, so it's good night from Anna and from me, and good evening to Ian Payne with 5 Live Sport.
First for breaking news.